Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, gentlemen. There's been some news across the internet. There's some good intros today. There's some relevant topics I think we should talk about. Anybody got any good ones to start off with? Seth, I think you've got one.
Speculation abounds.
There it is.
Let the rumor mills start.
Well, and there is a big event coming up too, right? That's kind of
there is a big event that is coming next week, which is the Build conference. Have you guys ever been to Build?
I've never been to it. I've been to all the
I mean,
online
it's mainly
ones.
a developer conference.
Yes. I tried to go like a couple years ago, and I was never able to kind of get people to sponsor me to go there or speak at it or something like that.
So periodically, I am one to navigate over to the Twitter feeds and see what's going on in the ecosystem over there. And yesterday was a tweet by Arun, and the tweet says, "Some big Power BI announcements at Build next week. One huge, in all caps, announcement that's probably the biggest new capability that we have shipped in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Join the session that Ask Priya and I are doing together. You don't want to miss it." And she is Priya Sathi. I don't know what she does.
So Arun,
but her tweet, she retweets and says, "An epic moment I've been waiting for." I think that means it's a game changer, Mike. A game changer is incoming.
You know what?
This sounds like a lead changer.
I'm gonna reserve my game changer moment until I actually see the feature. I don't really want to.
I feel you need an elevated game. Like what is above a game changer? Because you use that, enough, right? This seems like
epic.
Its own special thing. You gotta come up with something good. But
if we break down the word, yeah.
This is interesting, guys.
Well, this changed
in the
last
game. 3 years.
This just screams out for us to speculate on what it is.
I'm not speculating on it. I'm gonna say I'm gonna go watch it. I think it'll be good. I'm looking forward to it.
You have no clue.
However, I am like the biggest feature in the think about all the features that have been released in the last 3 years. This is the biggest feature since the last 3 years. Now here, I don't know. I'm a little bit skeptical. Here's
my breakdown. On this one. Okay, so all of us are in the weeds, right, of everything going on new and upcoming. That tweet's not meant for those people. This tweet's like Apple promoting the iPhone, even though people have known the iPhone's coming out for years. So I bet this is already on the roadmap in my head. This is not like, oh, we're going to surprise everyone. It's, hey, let's get the general audience up. So
the general public.
The general public. Right.
Well, yeah. if they come down and say we're going to give you CI/CD pipelines, I will be happy.
Okay. Don't think that's that level of the CEO of Microsoft or, yeah.
Oh, everyone wants CI/CD. Yeah, everyone loves that stuff.
Yeah. That's gonna be that'll show up on the Times. So if this is okay, and then that's the other thing I'm thinking. If this is this big of a game changer, this would have to show up in national news, right?
Yep.
So I'm going to speculate. I bet you this is going to be natural language stacks.
I don't know.
That's...
I'm not saying that's a great thing. I'm just saying what could possibly such a game changer that comes out of the freaking blue.
I looking at the roadmap of things, I'm thinking there's some pretty good things. There's some good solid features, but something that is huge in the hugest announcement in the last 3 years. I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna see what they say. I'm gonna reserve my game changer capability on this one. So
somebody in the chat was like, "Premium Gen 3?" I'm like, no, I don't think licensing is gonna
be $70 a month per user.
From
Pro Power BI premium per user plus.
The biggest,
yeah. Pro plus.
Maybe they bought Salesforce and Tableau.
Oh, that's funny.
The other thought is it's one of those things that they announced, but it won't come out for like 12 more months.
Maybe so. Yeah,
that's my level. It's either on the roadmap or we're not going to see it for 7 months.
Well, regardless, I'm looking forward to it. So for anyone who wants to know about what this
The
huge
PowerPoint
announcement
thing.
is, I would recommend you go to Build 2022. So you can just go ahead and look up Microsoft Build 2022. It is an event that is open for everyone. Everyone can attend. There's no restrictions there. You can just go sign up and go watch it.
Ooh,
So
I don't know,
it's an
Tommy.
online event.
What?
So if we're super sleuthing, right?
Mhm.
Sathy is big data, BI, and AI product management at Microsoft, and it's a co-joint presentation.
So what are you saying? It is CDCI pipelines, or is it the natural language stacks?
I
Oh,
don't
well,
know.
If we're dealing with AI,
let me give you
it's not
AI
PowerPoint.
okay.
something.
I'm gonna
Actually, could
throw
be.
a speculation here that is
Yes.
slightly different, but I will announce this. Kim Manus also retweeted that the Azure Synapse Analytics team has now opened up an influencer program. And one thing that we do know is there has been a large exodus, maybe not like exodus, migration, a large migration of a lot of the key Power BI people that we know have moved over. Looking at LinkedIn, they've moved over to the Synapse team. There's a lot of people who've been kind of, it's still under the same wing. It's still like data and Power BI and that space. But I have seen a lot of individuals kind of work their way over to the Synapse team. And actually, frankly, I'm using Synapse a lot right now, and I love it. I think it's a really good, a solid, strong program. It definitely helps me out a lot when I'm building data lake elements or lake type things. Think of it building the enterprise data warehouse and shaping and collecting data from the entire enterprise into one location. I really like it. I'm as I've probably deployed it 3 or 4 times now in different customers. It's easy to use. Once you get your head around how to control who has access to what, it's fairly easy to get to data. You can manipulate data fairly easily with Databricks or Spark Synapse. I like it. I think it's a winner. So
What days build?
I believe it is. Let me just pull up the notes here. Register on build 24th through the 26th. So that's next week. Next week, Tuesday through Thursday.
I almost feel we should do like a lot if it's worthy enough, and according to
We could,
Alex Powers, it is. We should do like a reaction pod. We've never done one of those.
reaction pod? Oh, maybe. Yeah. No, Alex already says this chat has already made my day. Awesome. You're welcome, Alex. From here on out, it is now
Thanks for
downhill.
joining.
Hey,
It is now
Alex, you know
downhill.
you
It's
can
all
make my
downhill
day.
from here. Like join for the first 5 minutes. You're good to go.
Yeah,
That's it.
Alex, you can make my day or our day. Just tell us what it is now.
This was the best of the podcast and chat. From here on out, it is going to be nothing but
Yeah.
junk. So
All downhill.
you're welcome for that.
Started off strong. Good job, gentlemen.
All right. Well, what kind of crappy topic are we talking about today?
Oh my God.
That's a good lead-in. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, like that. That's really gonna grip the listeners right now. They're gonna love that.
Real great transition.
If there's any other, we can do it. Any other announcements we want to kind of kick out here? Not sure there's any other announcements that I have.
So.
Those are the kind of the key things.
I mean, when you start with the biggest change in Power BI in 3 years, it's
I know.
hard to.
Yeah, where do you go from there?
Exactly.
Right? There's
And
no.
how was your
just
weekend?
Smack,
Like,
Where do you
yeah.
go from there? I'll tell you where we go from there. We go to calculation groups. Winner.
There, that gets a little more excitement into it. Yeah.
Which is, by the way, a game changer.
Oh yeah.
Very much so. I really like calculation groups. I think they're super solid. I really like them. I need to spend more time in them, which is actually a great lead in today. We have an individual coming to the Chicago and Milwaukee Power BI user groups. I'm going to get his name wrong probably. Bernat is going to be speaking at Tommy's group, and I'm going to be hosting some of the stuff from Power BI Tips Online. But he's going to go deep dive into all things around calculation groups, which I'm really excited to hear and see that. So that'll be really cool.
Bernat joined us in the chat this morning. So
Bernat's
if you
in
have
the
questions, right?
Yeah.
He's in there. Fire away and
This is his topic. So we're gonna
sell yourself, Bernat.
We're gonna do a very lousy job speaking about calculation groups now, and then you can hear the real person speak about how they really use them later today.
We're just gonna give you fuel for your presentation.
Yes.
Like this is why you don't want to do this.
Please refute everything we've said.
The Three Musketeers talk about.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm super
like
excited to have
blind
Bernat
mice.
on. So I'll give
There
a
you
little
go.
background for those listening. How we actually got him on the user group was honestly, I've been reading his articles for a while now. When I was trying to get into calculation groups, Marco Russo has some great, like the kind of the theoretical side of it, and just the use cases, but Bernat's actually showing these very specific demos of like how to actually show certain things in the table and all these like
Yep.
real like files to play with that I have relied on. And I've actually messaged him like, man, all these articles are great. Do you do user groups? He said, well, I am in Barcelona, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm not traveling. So that's why it is at 3 p.m. So we normally do it earlier. We are just doing the live stream
Yep. And
at 3
it'll be
p.m. Yeah,
recorded, so you can go
it'll be
watch it later,
recorded.
and
So
we'll
that's how it
promote
kind of
it.
came about. But I think it's due time that we do something like on calculation groups,
Yeah.
just because it's been out for a while now, and it is a game changer, but it's also hard to grasp.
Yeah. Yes. And let's maybe kind of do an overview. Okay. Let's think of, maybe we step back here just for a moment. For people who have heard the word calculation group but have maybe never used it, let's just give a high level overview of what is a calculation group and why would we want to use this. So, Tommy, you want to give us a kind of just a very brief run up on here on what a calculation group is, and then maybe we can talk about some use cases around where you'd want to implement or why you'd want to implement a calculation group.
So calculation groups came about in where we have a lot of our redundant measures, and part of that's coming from the Microsoft documentation, but
Mm-hmm.
where we'd have like if you had 5 measures and you need to create year to date, previous year, quarter date, previous quarter.
Yep.
If you wanted to create each of those for your 5 measures, you've multiplied, if you could do simple math, into 25 to 35 measures just for those particulars, and you had to write them each over and over. With calculation groups, it actually allows you to, in a sense, iterate over any measure that you have, where the actual DAX measure is not the measure itself, it's literally whatever's selected in a visual.
Hmm.
So if you imagine you had 10 measures and you had the base template of year to date, previous year to date,
Yes.
all you have to do is drag in any measure. It's like, hey, so this is the selected measure. So we're going to do that calculation over that. And we're going to iterate over that, which again, greatly reduces how many measures you have to create. And it's not obviously the best use case, and the best example is our time intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
but it really can be anything where you have to do that same base, that same template, the iteration over and over again. So from there, I mean, this absolutely goes into our realm of game changer when it came out.
Yes. Definitely would say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is actually a feature that is closing the gap between the older stuff, and this is something I think that Marco Russo
Mhm.
team talks about. There's this other concept around multidimensional models. So an MDX model, you define the calculation. Like the calculation
Right.
is a sum, and then that sum can be like an input variable to another formula. So like how I think about
Right.
calculation groups, it's the idea of like I can make a part of a DAX measure, and then I can use that as the context to inform other calculations. Let me try and materialize this into like more of an example, maybe, right? If I have some of the sales column, which would give me total sales, I could use that in a calculate function where I filter out, give me the, use the calculate, sum of sales measure, and
Mhm.
then you could have, same period last year, whatever that. So it's giving you kind of like the comparison period of time. Well, if you think about it, if you also want to do that calculation for average sales dollars or average sales price per item, whatever, the formula, the base formula would be average sales, but then you're repeating the same calculate function. It's still calculate that average, and then you're again using the same same period
Right.
last year, and then so you're basically having to write multiple equations. And so now what calculation groups, it allows you to parameterize that single equation. Now when I look at Bernat's code on how he's been doing these things, Marco Russo has done a really good job in SQL BI. There's a lot of other things you can consider and areas where you may not want to use that calculation group in certain like the way the measures calculate themselves on a visual. There's specific use cases for where you want to drag it in, where you don't. How do you add it to a visual? How do you not? Which visuals obey calculation groups really well? Which ones don't? So there is some protections that you can do, like checking some things inside those formulas to make sure that it blanks it out or resolves an actual number for you.
Right.
So
So is this like it's similar to the old MDX calculated members
Yes,
or something like,
I
right?
think something similar
Hmm.
to that. I think is what they're trying to. I think that's the
And then
parallel.
and calculation groups only work on explicit measures, right?
100. Well, and
Right.
as soon as you create a calculation group, the entire data model must only be explicit measures.
You
So,
can't exactly.
that's
Gotcha.
one of the caveats. As soon so another thing
So
here.
yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah.
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 I remember
Yep.
one of my main guys talking to me about
So if you
us having if we were going to create one, we had to go review the whole
no,
shebang.
Yeah.
no implicit
Everything.
measures
Yep.
That
anywhere,
makes sense.
and I would
I
argue,
didn't realize it was the whole model. It was just I thought it was just the table.
yeah, and there's actually so inside the multidimensional model, or sorry, in the tabular model, there is a setting that says no implicit measures. So as soon as you create the calculation group, it
It-
forces that flag to be true. So there's no
And
longer
you
any,
cannot disable it.
and you
Yeah.
can't disable it.
Or you can turn it. Yeah.
You have to delete the calculation group out, and then you have to flip that flag back over to you can have implicit
Right.
measures. I would also argue, though, I mean, especially now that we do a lot of BI development stuff, I would say you should not be using implicit measures, hence the name of this podcast.
I was about
Or-
to say, by virtue of the
yeah.
podcast, we always
That's
turn
why.
off that.
That's why. Yeah. That's why I explicitly
We,
pronounce that word.
yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of crossover there.
Yes,
Yeah.
a lot of crossover.
The other thing for listeners that may be like calculation groups, where is this thing in Power BI?
Oh, good
Yeah,
question. Yeah,
oh,
good
yeah.
really good point. Yeah, make this point.
It's not in the
You can't
desktop.
get it.
It's not in Power BI.
You can't get it.
Like so we know we've touted tabular editor. What is you can apparently you can do this directly in TMSL if you know it how to do that, but that would be
But good luck.
yeah. And then what Visual Studio with analysis services projects, I think there's a certain version you need, but I think those are like the three ways in which you can create them to be recognized and then start using them in your Power BI reports after you connect to that, right?
Yes. And
So
yep.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, the good news is you can do this in also Tableau Editor 2. So it's not like this is a paid-only feature. You can still download the free Tableau Editor or Business Ops and enable this, but there's no way to modify, create, delete, or really edit a calculation group at all in the desktop alone. So honestly, I think
it's kind of reminds me of like the genie in the bottle, and the bottle is hidden in the the giant cavern, right? Like whatever I forget the movie.
It is crazy this is not
But
available
it's
on
like
desktop at all.
it's like it's so powerful, but
Right.
you would never unless you like somebody said, "Hey, calculation groups. Hey, maybe that's a good thing that we're talking about it." People can go look for it.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly right.
Yeah, Bernard said you can't even see the expression in desktop. You
Mhm.
can only view that in a third-party
Right.
tool,
So I think
not
that's
sanctioned by Microsoft.
so to me. There's a big so I love the feature that it came out. Super great feature. Really think it's solid. It also does some really interesting things around like if you want some custom formatting, right? So if you have, you can use a switch statement for some. So previously, the previous episode of non-calculation groups, what you could build is you could build some like not hackish things, but it's kind of like a workaround to some of this. Like let's say you have a line chart and you wanted to change, from a sum to an average, or you wanted to switch between two different calculations, you could use a switch statement to adjust which calculation is showing on the line chart. And then that's all just DAX. You write straight DAX for that. The downside, though, is if you're using a number like a dollar amount, right? Have the formatting for dollars, and then you transition over to a percentage, it's very difficult to get that switch function to update the formatting of that new calculation to adjust. So this is another area where calculation groups kind of excels a bit. Not only does calculation groups define different measures or how you could replace different measures, it actually allows you to retain the formatting to some degree between the different calculation groups. So I could go from a percentage to a dollar amount to a whole number to a decimal, and you have some flexibility there to adjust that dynamically
Right.
as inside the calculation group. So that's where I've seen other people potentially use calculation groups when they want to have, a selection of, oh, here's my table, pick what measures you want to see on the table or matrix or whatever, and then those automatically have the correct formatting based on the data types.
Right. I think another way to really expand on the power of calculation groups, because some may be thinking right now, well, okay, this sounds great, but I can do a lot of this in the switch and kind of solve most of my problems.
Yep.
Where it really expands again, it's not just, hey, choose a measure and have that displaying on the visuals. Yeah, you can do that in the switch. But if you had in your entire report, if you had like almost like a data mart for a user to choose a measure, but you had all of these, in a sense, dependent measures, right? Where you had the sales year to date
Yeah.
over a previous period, and you wanted everything to, basically have that dynamic value to iterate over not just the current value, but like a rolling average and the rolling previous average.
Mm-hmm.
That calculation groups basically allow you to do so, where you can basically say, choose this base measure and have all my percentages, rates,
Yep.
filter all, percentage total,
Yep.
all based on the one measure that was selected. And that you cannot do in a, I mean, you could do in a switch, but with an incredible amount of work.
Yeah, and
Right.
for me, like the easy thing here too is like for where I see the most value for where I've leveraged it, it's a lot of these common calculations, right? When you're having a report definition conversation, how do you guys want to see your data? There's always like a common comparison that people are typically using.
There's comparisons, yeah.
Yeah. So there's not a really, here's how I would say this. There's usually, okay, I'm gonna go a little bit off the trail here just a bit, just to kind of bring back the point here. When I go to like Google Analytics, in Google Analytics, it gives you basically like two calendars where I can pick one calendar and then the second calendar. There's like basically two calendar date ranges. And so I can say, grab this calendar for the last 7 days. And then I can go grab another calendar and I can do like the last 7 days prior, or I could go grab the last 7 days last month, or basically it lets you have full capability to adjust any time period comparison that you want. Easily. And so Power BI does not give you a very easy to do like dual calendar selection method. You can do it, but sometimes it takes like two different calendars that you're talking about and you're having to use one to look up the other so you can, I've done designs around that same kind of functionality, but Power BI doesn't really give you an easy way of doing this. Okay, so that being said, sometimes the report requirements come in as we always do this type of calculation. And what I find is, yes, people want the whole full flexible time range selection to compare different time ranges, but in reality, they don't. Usually people get confused when there's too much selection criteria. And what I find from a report requirement standpoint is people really need like common time period comparisons. Okay, what is it, this week to date versus last week to date? How are we trending? Or what is the last 7 days compared to the prior last 7 days? Prior last 7 days last month? Prior 7 days last year, right? There's some, what is this month to date compared to last month to date? There's usually common comparison periods that you're using that somewhat make sense. And when you're showing graphics or visuals, you're trying to show lines on that graph or whatever that is against some kind of standard range of stuff.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Oh, go ahead.
It's not funny. It's actually very relevant, right?
No. It's relevant.
What I say is funny, but not this.
but that's what I find. That's what I find in report. That's what I find in report requirements, right? Because I mean, I've seen it. Like this is something that I feel like I struggled with when talking about requirements, because people want the whole dynamic select everything, but in reality, it just becomes slower for them to pick what they really want. But when you get down to the brass tacks of like what do you really need, they need clear, delineated time period comparisons, and so you can clearly distinguish what's going on. That's something that I feel like is relevant for people. When you give them that simplicity, they literally want a slicer that says compare to last week, to last month, to whatever. You basically pick from this pick list of time period comparisons, and then it makes it easier to understand, okay, now when I see this percentage, I can clearly see what is the comparison time period and the percentage up or down.
So I find the humor in your statement, Mike.
Okay.
So because I've actually literally, and I mean the actual term literally, built that in a solution where we had a web analytics dashboard. And one of the big requirements, like, hey, we love in Google Analytics that ability to choose a date range and have a period.
This is exactly the thing I went to too.
Yeah. So again, funny and relevant.
But
but But what happened, this was before calculation groups. We had 4, like, there's a lot of metrics in web analytics. So I think we had 8 metrics that became 24 because we had to do the current period based on a slider, previous period, percentage difference. And to try to, 1, display that, and then 2, try to create and manage that it was unsustainable, so to speak. And it was like, this is insane. What if they want something, like a previous month, it's another measure. Calculation groups solves that.
Yes.
So in terms of why they're a big deal, right? We've laid out that I think it's ultimately a reduction in time if you're using a lot of these calculations across multiple measures, and
Totally
you're
agree.
reducing a ton of bloat in the model.
Yes.
Right.
Easier to manage
along with I think adding some additional capabilities. But so I know calculation groups on a theoretical level. I haven't applied them in any reporting yet.
Mm-hmm.
So walk me through when you're creating a calculation group. Essentially, you can create the calculation items, and those are the slices of whatever you're doing, right? So it's I could do a year to date, quarter to date, month to date, which is the more normal date time ranges or date ranges. So depending on how many calculation items I create within that group, when I use that in a report, it'll automatically show like all the items, right? Like all the slices of the measure that I'm calculating.
Well,
correct?
Yes and no. So it depends. So this is a great point that you're making here, because once you have the calculation group, you kind of have to know how to use it too, because it's a little bit interesting, like how you drag the certain fields.
Because the follow-up to that
is,
can I use that in a slicer? Or how, like I've seen, right? Choosing and picking and choosing which one, like how does that functionality work within that?
Yes. And so here's how I'll try to describe this as best I can, because this again, highly recommend you come to Bernat's session.
We're just teeing it up for people that visual.
It's going to be a lot harder for you to listen to the podcast and know, oh yeah, we know what's going on.
Yeah, here's a calculation item. What the hell are you talking about? Yeah.
So it's a little bit
come in midway through this one, you're gonna be like, what?
It's gonna be easier to see it when you see someone demoing how to build stuff in there.
Whatever our number of listeners now is, the highest it's gonna get.
Yes, again. We were already hitting our peak at 5 minutes in. We're still on the downward trend now. So think, if you're thinking of like a matrix, right? So you can you think of this as what I think happens, and again, this is my understanding of it. I could be incompletely thinking about this because I haven't used it a ton. But the idea is, if you think about the calculation group, it creates a separate table inside the data model. And inside that table, it gives you all of almost like a column list of, here is all of the different time comparisons or whatever you're going to do. Current year, last year, year-over-year percentage, right? It gives you some different calculations. And if we think about like the measures, right? The measures are kind of simple, right? If you can think of a simple example as being, I'm doing a sum and average of these various columns. And then all we're doing is the calculation group is basically modifying that calculate statement and adjusting potentially the filter context of that particular measure. So if you build a matrix, you can have product categories on the row level of the table, and then across the column level, you can apply the calculation group. So that's where you would apply basically the column that describes each of the calculations on the columnar level. And then in the values section, you would grab your sum of sales,
right?
Your average,
So measure.
Yes, and I think the key for me, or the aha moment when I was learning to work with these, was there is a new function that you use in calculation called selected measure.
Yep.
So that is like the input measure parameter. So it says whatever measure is in the context of this filter context, I'm going to calculate that.
Right.
And the neat part about a matrix is if you add multiple measures to the values area, it starts splitting out in the matrix multiple calculations. So you can have, for example, think about, products on the rows level, and in the columnar level, you have these time period calculations. But then you could add sum of sales, average of sales, max sale amount, right? And what it will do in the matrix, it'll break out each of the measures for you automatically in 3 row segments. And so we'll say, okay, here's the current year calculation for each of these 3 measures, and we'll do that for every single calculation group. So
Is
it can
this
like
where you start to get into where you're setting the precedence of which calculation
Yeah,
group
so this
goes
is
on
that
another
which
good point.
measure?
Yeah.
yes is another part of
So
that too. Yes.
Because
so the
you're talking about mixing measures in a table,
right. So
right?
Correct.
this is where the headaches and the stiff drinks kind of get involved. Because
Yes.
you can definitely run into some issues. But no, to Mike's point,
Inject headache
again,
here, I guess.
yeah, selected headache. Uh,
Selected headache. Yes, exactly right.
but it is really like it's like a switch statement 2.0
Yep.
where it's in doing evaluation context where your calculation items are rows in a column, and the selected measures, if there's 3 measures in that context, it's going to dynamically expand to how many measures and apply that per calculation item. Now
Yes.
the precedence, and this is huge, where and I've run, like I said, I ran into something where it was almost like it became a horror movie in my report because I'm like, what? Get away, get out of it. Like I could not no matter what measure I pulled in, it was doing in my head the wrong thing. So the precedent, right? Precedence or ordinal is basically if you had year to date, previous year to date, and year over year. Well, in your head, that would work pretty simple. Just always apply the selected measure,
Mm.
like that previous year. That being said, it's not necessarily going to apply year to date versus what's if you're saying the selected measure, it's going to do sum of sales. If you do year over year, well, your selected measure is sum of sales.
Mm.
So it doesn't work that way. In order for it to work that way, you basically have to say which calculation item do you apply first,
Mm.
and then it basically allow that value to be stored. So this is the hardest thing to grasp to me in calculation groups, where it was by far the barrier to entry, my barrier to entry, and where I kind of avoided it because it was like, I can't wrap my head around this. It's only causing headaches, and it's literally breaking my reports.
Yep.
Until honestly, Marco Russo has like you said, if you want the the white paper journalism articles on how this works, read Marco Russo's one.
Yeah, I'm gonna
If
put
you
that in the
want
link
that
right now.
real, yeah,
There's a good introduction to calculation groups and like
yeah, he has
why
like
you're
series of 9 articles. Yeah,
yeah, it's like this is chapter 1 of the book of 9.
seriously,
It
yeah,
well, and that's where some of the um, maybe some of the explanation of when we talk about calculation groups and how often people are using them,
Yep.
it kind of dovetails a bit, right?
Yeah, and the article from SQL BI does a really good job.
mhm,
He literally writes out
It's
in
deep.
it's deep and it gives you a good overview very quickly. Like the
Yeah.
first couple paragraphs, hey, here is a calculation, year to date sales, year to date cost, year to date margin, year to date quantity. And he basically shows you here's 5 formulas you would normally write, and it's using the same function, it's the same pattern over and
mhm,
over again.
like
And
2
then
plus 3.
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah,
then
yeah,
he shows you like, okay, conceptually, here's how you would adjust that measure such that it would make sense in a calculation group. And just basically, oh,
yeah,
you're like, oh my gosh, yes, this is
yeah,
I'm writing the same thing over and over again. Totally makes sense. But
right.
then,
Don't know if it's a conscious shift or just something they used in
I think it
this
is.
set of articles, but like the fact that they're like the whole first part is starting with the business use case
yes.
and using pseudo logic is just brilliant. I
Yeah,
mean, it really frames
Yes.
things in the context of like how you would use this
100%.
before it goes
right,
into like this is a calculation group and this
Yes.
is how
right.
you use it. Yeah,
Yes.
No,
it's
and
a fantastic
Because
set of
it
articles.
needs to be one of these things when you're building these things, you need to identify a clear um reason to why it needs to be there.
right,
What is this?
yeah,
It's solving a very specific problem. Understand the
and
problem first, and then you can apply the
Right.
code to match that problem. And then it just gets from there. It
yeah.
just gets much more crazy. You can do all kinds of other crazy
To
things.
me,
And
it's
So
very much our twist to like when we begin to grasp evaluation context. And I think the example Marco Russo had is if you had 3 items, like calculation item A was 2 plus 3,
Hmm.
calculation item B was A times 3, right? Well, how do you make sure in a sense it goes in that order where 2 plus 3 shows up first, so it's 5 times uh you know it's the result of A multiplied by whatever calculation item B is. So that, like I said, it's a hard to grasp in the beginning, and it very much
yeah.
to me felt like about the first time you're like, what's filter context?
Mhm.
So Tommy, obviously you've got experience playing with these pretty extensively. It sounds like. So in terms of What are there any other model changes that you had to make outside of just ensuring that you didn't have explicit
Yeah.
measures? And obviously, I would assume you have a
And
date
that's the
table,
crazy
and
thing. Yeah. So honestly, the only thing you have to account for is like one of my other big headaches was it would, if you just create a calculation group, it's going to apply that to every measure in your table unless you define what measures should result. So I was like, I
oh,
don't
okay.
want,
So,
yeah,
but that's a good point, though, right?
yeah,
Because
Mhm.
that's an option within calculation groups that you can choose
select,
specific measures that you
right,
want it to like take effect
right,
on, but ignore others. So
right,
that's a way in which you could have other measures within the same
right,
matrix or visual.
right.
Okay,
Because you don't necessarily want calculation groups on
right.
everything. And when you create the calculation group, like there's no configuration on your model you have to do. That being said, once you create it and load it into your model, it applies to your entire model and to every measure. So
Mhm.
that's where like I had a card and it was showing like the average is something like, whoa, why is this showing me this result? And I could not get out of that until I realized that you have, if you want to only apply to a select number of measures, you have to define that.
Well, that seems like a very poignant point.
Bernard, I hope
Poignant,
you had that in
like
your
a big
demo.
point, right? Like I only
Yeah,
I know I only want it to work on these particular measures,
right.
and other ones I wouldn't
Because
want it
it
to.
looked like my entire report broke.
Yeah.
So there
Huh.
are some other. So I'm reading through the Microsoft article. There are some known limitations that I'll just kind of point out here as
Yeah.
well. One of them is calculations groups are defined. They are tables, but using object level security. So that means hiding or showing a table based on user permissions. Right? I show up and you can see these 5 tables and not all 10 tables, kind of thing.
Hmm.
That doesn't work on calculation groups. So object level security is not supported with calculation groups.
So
Another
yeah.
another one that I had a question around is I think RLS, right? But
Mhm.
does
Yes,
that mean direct application of RLS on that table?
yes.
Or
So that's what it says. That's the next one I was
so
going to
I
go
can
to.
still have RLS on the model that
Yes,
still filters
Yeah.
down things appropriately.
yes. You
It's just
cannot.
I can't apply it to that table.
Correct. It says here RLS is not supported. Define
And that makes
RLS on
sense
the
to me.
tables in the same model, but not on the calculation groups themselves directly or indirectly. So
Okay.
there's an issue with that. Applying the indirect or direct relationships to the calculation group tables that are created. That
How
will
would that
not work.
even like what's confusing to me is like
Why would you even use it?
why is that even a caveat, right? Like
M-
there's nothing you're going to reference in
Maybe
that table
you can
that
see
Yeah.
you
you would
can see year to
RLS under.
date. You can't see year over year though. That's not acceptable to your calculation.
But
Like
it's all
Don't even think
I
about
don't
it.
know.
whatever.
May-
All right.
maybe
I
someone.
read that first and I'm like, well, now I can't use it, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
RLS isn't going to
Oh,
work.
yeah.
I'm like, well,
Well, every
no,
model I
no,
have
read
has
between the lines.
some
Yeah.
Yeah.
RLS. Yeah.
That being said, there are more. I'm sure there's more limitations. Were there any other ones you wanted to?
Well, there is another one. Detail rows expressions are not supported in calculation groups. So I don't really know what that one means. What a detailed row expression is? That when you click like in Excel, you click on something and it gives you the
Oh,
details of it.
I guess it's probably maybe it's when you if you use an implicit measure when you try to say like show the table.
Yeah, because they're showing when I go and I click on the
But
link for detailed rows, it starts going over to like Excel. It starts showing you like you have a matrix in
yeah,
Excel, and you click on the one cell and say,
fine.
okay, whatever.
That's
Sorry.
never been a
Yeah.
big help anyway. So yeah, fine,
Nothing.
whatever.
I always click
And
on a cell like that in Power Pivot and or pivot tables. I'm like, oh shoot, I just clicked the. I gotta delete that page.
that was
Crap,
a mistake.
that was a mistake. Whoops, delete.
So
I think
basically, the
another one is
limitations you won't make that mistake anymore.
I think another one is direct query, right? Like this only works with in memory.
I don't see that as a
No, no,
limitation.
that's not. I
Really?
well, I don't know if you can only create it in a loaded model. I want to. I think I mentioned this on a previous podcast,
Huh.
but I think it does bode well to say it again. I had a situation where
It doesn't say that.
the they wanted to basically return a certain price level based on a selection, and like in a paginated report, and using calculation groups, the calculation items are one of the parameters in the paginated report.
Mm,
I couldn't believe how well this worked. Where they would say like, okay, I'm going to choose this price level,
mm-hmm.
and it would just return per the product the right value. It was absolutely incredible how well that worked. And this is a paginated report. So it's a data model loaded from Power BI.
Mhm.
So in terms of expanding the types of situations here, I think still like, yeah, there are the limitations, but my gosh, there are so many situations I think we run into
Mhm.
that there are even the unknown unknowns or the known unknowns to speak of where
Mhm.
it does apply when we really look at it.
I don't
Do
see
you
anything that distinctly calls off anything around
around direct
direct
query?
query. So I think you can use
Oh,
it, but I
cool.
think Bernard is actually saying don't do it. He's like it's a bad idea.
I mean, I would imagine it would take quite a bit of time.
Yeah, because
Quite the process, yeah.
you're building a bunch of like dynamic calculations on the fly there
Right.
immediately. So you're going to be hitting whatever source system with a lot of
That's true.
sums and
Depends.
calculates and averages like all at once, and it's going to try and do like again you're taking like a simple formula like a sum of a column, and then you're like flipping the context of that around 5 different ways all at once. So you're basically using like 5 formulas at the same like. So I just feel like I feel like that's a bad idea.
I'm gonna lean on
I-
Bernard on this one as well.
Yeah. Well, I think I
Yeah.
just add to
He says you just should discourage it.
my always using calculated columns and always use direct query, right? For
Right.
the best Power
Yeah,
BI
yes,
reports.
exactly.
Chris Wagner.
Where's Chris? Where's
Where's-
Chris?
where's
Did you
Chris?
capture that, Chris?
So do you think this is a good time to pivot? I do have a question that's not as technical, but kind of relates to this.
Can I ask one
Yeah,
other
yeah.
question real quick?
Yeah.
Mike, have you ever called a calculated? Can you call a calculated or a calculation group or calculated item from an application?
Yeah, it's like just making a query that runs that calculation
Yeah.
item.
Because like we
I have not-
we use cases where we call measures,
Yep.
right?
Yep. I have not done it, but I would imagine you should be able to get to the same answer if you drew out the matrix and then did a performance analysis or did a performance analyzer and then watch the query that was running to build the
Which one?
matrix. So I think what you would do is you would build the calculation group, and I'm pretty sure you could get to the same answer. Like learn the DAX auto-generated code that desktop is providing when it uses calculation groups. Build your table, put a couple items in there, and then do the performance analyzer, record it, and then you record that one query. I think it just runs just like a normal DAX statement because the visual has to run at some level. There's the visual, no matter what it is, it's going to run some simple measure and column selection thing. So it's going to give you filters and the summarized table solution to get the answer there. I think you could just do that, and then you could just use calculation groups directly in your XMLA query endpoint. I guess is what you're referring to, right? Yeah.
I love that question because it basically sounds like, and if the answer is yes, can I call you after?
maybe. But
Yeah.
I mean, anytime I'm doing something like that, that's a whole nother topic by itself. Like when you're using the performance analyzer, but that's a really great use case for performance analyzer. If you want to build a paginated report and you want to get the query that's going to build the table that you need in the paginated report, I don't write custom DAX. I just go right to desktop. I drag the columns that I need into the table. If I want to filter that table by something, I'll just add the filters to the filters for this visual, and then I'll just hit record. Watch what's in performance analyzer, and I mean to some degree though, guys,
it is the easiest way to
it's the easy
and use a model.
and use an existing model, what you're going to hit initially, and it will write out the DAX, and then you can go simplify it because there's usually things like it has a top end 501 because it's limiting the number of rows in that table, so you don't over get too many rows in the table. But man, if there is a part of the program that generates automatic DAX, by far the easiest to read is using Performance Analyzer. I'm not even kidding you.
Right.
Like, build a couple of visuals on the page, record what's going on. That is the best way to understand what automatic DAX is being written to generate a table of information in your report.
Tommy, what was your question?
Sorry, Tommy, back to your question.
So, one comment on that, and I actually say this all the time in training to people, that this is what people got to realize too, that even when we're not creating DAX, there's still DAX occurring that we might not even be aware of.
That's true.
And I think with calculation groups, like I don't know what that margin of performance, like enhanced performance is. I haven't measured that. I hear Greg on that because I'm sure he's got some model that can easily do that. But that would be interesting to see, like, what enhanced performance does a calculation group do? So,
well, even when you're using DAX, it's not the DAX that is being run, right? Like it's like SQL, right? You're just prompting the engine to do its thing.
Yeah.
This is what I want you to do.
This
And
is
it's
the
like,
dumb
okay,
thing I want.
I got
Yeah.
this from here, dummy.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like sending in your order for a menu and then
Right.
letting the chef do the rest.
Right.
So here's my question. For a professional in the space, where does the skill of calculation groups reside? Is this something that if you say you're an experienced Power BI professional, you're a skilled professional, well, you better well know how to use calculation
Oh
groups?
boy, this is
Not
going.
saying you're an expert, but
Oh,
you should
man.
be able to apply it. Or is this one of those like really nice to have, like, oh, he's really good at SQL, also he knows, like, like Python. So where does this skill reside?
All right, so I'll give you my opinion here. This is not an easy question.
That's what I'm asking
This
for.
is a consultant answer to some degree.
Don't say it depends. You're not
It's
allowed.
not. It's not. It depends. This is what I would call a challenge question, right? So if someone comes into me and says, "I'm an expert in Power BI," and to me, I use a gauge of how many years have you been quote unquote doing Power BI, right? So if someone comes to me and says, "I've been doing Power BI for a year," I might not assume that you are calculation group worthy, right? You have not been able to pull that sword out of that stone yet. So I may ask them, have you done a calculation group before? And if they say yes, at a year to 2 years old in Power BI, I'll ask them to explain what is it and how have you used it. I'll go deeper. I won't just ask you, have you read what a calculation group is? If you are a 3+ year Power BIer, I would definitely ask you what you're doing. And I will, another telltale question I ask around that is, what kind of external tools do you use with Power BI? If they say like DAX Studio, I know you're not making calculation groups. So I may ask the question to make sure I understand what they're doing. But I mean, to me, I'm pulling different threads of a conversation there together, and I'm trying to look for where's the BS alarm, right? So do you know none of the external tools, but yet you tell me you know how to make calculation groups? Well, I know that right there is a miss. You can't make a calculation group without it. Like, how do you handle implicit measures in a calculation group? I would expect them to say you can't use implicit measures in a calculation group. So I will ask very like clear questions there that will right away tell me if they're lying to me about that particular feature. And honestly, if I'm doing interviews with people and helping companies find talent for Power BI, these are the kind of questions that I ask for if they want a professional. Like if you're going to pay top dollar for people, you better know this stuff. So
I would love to see you interviewing.
Darren goes, remind me not to interview with Mike. But I'm the technical interview.
I ask trick questions.
I love to see go.
Hey,
interesting.
I want to know. I want to I would rather have it be awkward for that one, 30-minute to an hour-long interview, and being able to clearly evaluate what your skill level is. Because the challenge I face with working with clients to hire talent is you will ask a question. The hiring managers ask a question about Power BI, but they themselves do not understand Power BI to the nth degree. And so you get a lot of people who have read the literature and can spew out what they've read and haven't actually done it. So for my opinion, like I'm picking pretty hard on what's going on there. And I'll give you fine. You won't get every question that I ask right, but I'll get a much better perspective on how much
theoretical
bullcrap is coming through this, and how much are you actually able to do? Like, is this a person who can come in and just build a report? I'll give you that analysis. Or is this a person who can come in and build the report and model and govern? I'll have a better understanding of what your capability is. Sorry, that's a very long answer to that, to your question. Are you if you're a Power BI professional, I would say if you've been with the tool long enough, you should have dabbled in calculation groups. You should have made a couple. You should have Tabular Editor installed on your machine. You should have made a couple calculation groups just to make sure you know how it works.
Not even talking about Tabular Editor, or I mean, not even talking about calculation groups. What percentage of let's segment the pro that you're talking about. We're talking the BI hardcore developer that works on larger models, works on enterprise systems.
Agreed.
Not the business unit.
Oh, totally agree with that. This is not a business unit level person.
So
way
of
more
those
technical.
Of those people, now we're already in a very small group.
Yep.
Right, of Power BI users.
I would agree.
How many actually use Tabular Editor? What's the percentage?
I think it's growing. I think.
I do too.
I would
or
say,
Visual Studio,
yep.
right?
Let's
Like,
speculate
Oh,
15%.
I hope Visual Studio is like less than 1% anymore. Like I can't stand using Visual Studio to like
I
work
get
on
it.
models. Ugh.
What would you say? 15%.
I would speculate 15%.
So of
Honestly,
15%, how many have used calculation groups?
Half,
see,
maybe
because
not
it's
even
not a
half.
universal
7.
application.
Yeah,
So
it's a small
I think
group.
it's I
Yeah, and
think
that's
I think then that um, this is one of those things that sets individuals apart in that already small niche of
mhm.
professional, because
Yep.
they've obviously gotten away without it for quite some time before the feature even existed, right? Um, but I wouldn't characterize this as a must-have, right? In I guess depending on the level of individual I'm looking for. If we're talking enterprise modeling, massive models, like yeah, I would hope somebody
Right.
understands calculation groups, because the amount of like that's going to be a really clean model. Like if we're building from scratch or we're fixing things up, it makes a lot of sense that somebody understands how to utilize the capabilities. I would say I would be okay if somebody could explain how to use them because they're aware of them, right? In terms of
Hmm.
being able to apply them. But of course, somebody who's had the application of that knows the tips and tricks and caveats to all those things as well. And if you go and see Bernat's, session today, maybe more people will actually have some practical application to it. But I think
Yeah.
it's a niche thing that is extremely valuable, right? But it also takes a lot to ramp up into just by saying calculation group, right? And
Hmm.
that's maybe where some of the fall off happens, I guess, to me, from how widely they're used. Is this isn't like an individual coming in saying, oh, like DAX is a really, there's so many functions, so many things I have to learn. Calculation groups is like a word, and it opens up a whole nother rabbit hole of really deep functionality that allows you to, I think, not I think, allows you to extend your reporting and get immense value immediately,
Yes.
right? Repeated effort, right? You're not wasting time. It's almost like a virtuous waste kind of thing in models,
Yeah.
right?
Agreed.
Where be specific, understand calculation groups, and boom, the doors like kind of open for certain scenarios of reporting. And yeah, I think that's where it lands. But
Yeah.
Okay.
And
I
I think I'm
wouldn't go
somewhere in between.
so huge though, just from the standpoint that it is a niche thing.
So this is a I'm gonna go something funny here just for a moment, but I remember the moment, and this is bad. This is how data weird I am. I remember the moment when I started seeing Marco Russo talking about uh the calculation groups, and I actually had to Google. I just googled the tweet that he sent out. So someone sent out game changer Power BI from the Data Dojo, and he has a message here. It says from Marco Russo, breaking news: you can create calculation groups in Power BI desktop, July 2020 release, and like,
Oh, wow.
yeah, this was like, to me, like, this is a game changer of a thing. This was an ample. So hopefully build can one up calculation groups. So that was 2020 calculation groups. We're almost two.
Natural DAX.
Oh, so
Natural DAX groups.
Build, you've got some big shoes to follow
Some big
behind
shoes to
calculation
fill.
groups here. We
Yeah.
need to,
Right.
if you say this is going to be bigger than calculation groups, I mean
Right.
and I would consider the expert in BI and developing tabular models, the SQL BI team, if they're saying it's that big of a deal, like this better be a bigger deal than that. So to me, it's just comparison.
Yeah, someone check Russo's Twitter to see where he's at.
Yeah,
But
I don't see if
I think I'm somewhere in between. To go back to the kind of the question, I think I'm somewhere in between you guys, where if you say you're super proficient in DAX, like you're like way ahead of the game, I'm expecting you to have applied it. But that being
I would
said,
agree.
yeah. But that being said, like, I think Seth, you're right on point. How many people have used Tableau Editor? And to that point, there's not a universal application for calculation groups in every model, in every situation. Everyone can use Tabular Editor for every model and should, but the calculation groups, that's not 100% of your models that require it.
Mhm.
So, you may have not run into the situation, you may have not been aware, but I think at the same point, if you say you're highly experienced in DAX, you should have run into the situation before. This shouldn't be the first
Well, it
concept
is
for you.
it is 100% to Mike's point in interviewing, right? If you're giving yourself a 10 out of 10 in DAX and you don't know what a calculation group
Right.
is, that speaks more to me than any other part of the conversation.
Just be honest.
Right.
Just be honest
Right.
with me. Just be honest. Like, I haven't done it before. I've read about it. It does this. I think. I'm pretty sure I could figure it out. I know I have to do it. Like,
Right.
give me
I mean,
like
most
some.
people are going to be like, "What's it? No, I've that's not in the Power BI desktop." You're
Well,
right.
yeah,
It's
and
not.
like a lot of stuff we do though, it's like if I had to take a test in calculation groups, I don't know if I'd do well, but I have my resources where I kind of bring them up every time I have to create it. Like I have literally a set of bookmarks from Bernard and Russo that I just have to bring up for reference every time I create a new one, just to make sure I'm doing everything right.
Mhm.
Good thing we're not tested on this, like in terms of like what's your precedence, but we know where it's that ability to identify the different components, what their particular um, purpose is, and then being able to apply it. Yeah, there's always going to be some testing. I don't think you should expect to get 100% every time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we're on the same point here. Well, it's like the same question, Mike, I asked in my interviews. I say, what resources do you use to learn about Power BI? And when they don't say the podcast, they say, thank you for your time. And I walk them out the door.
Well, and that's an awesome. That's
I
another.
show a face of disappointment,
Yeah.
just like, well, clearly you're not really a professional.
Seth laughs because this is a question that we have on, like, when Seth and I were doing some interviews together, this is a question that we would ask, and we would ask not do you listen to our podcast, but more like, what are the public figures that you follow that you listen to or read about, or where do you get information from? Like, where does the information come for you for doing Power BI things? And if you say, "Oh, I found this guy, he's Explicit Measure podcast. It's great." Definitely bonus
Hired.
points. Hired immediately. Give him a raise. Double the pay.
Do you know who this guy is? Huh? Oh,
Looking for
amazing.
learners. That's what you're doing in interviews. Anyway,
That's amazing.
calculation groups.
well, I can't wait for all the
super
things we
powerful.
talked about to be refuted by Bernard. We're saying that's
Yeah.
wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. Never do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is like the take the explicit measures with a grain of salt on this one, and most of the information comes from people who really deal with this at a deeper level. And Bernard is one of the individuals who are I have learned a lot from. So
Yeah. Regardless, I think it's a good teaser for his session. You said today, right?
Today, 3 p.m.
Today at 3.
Central.
Yes. Awesome.
Cool.
Well, thank you all very much. I think we've burned through a pretty good hour here already. Wow, it's already gone by. It went by a lot quicker than I thought. So this was a fun conversation, as always.
Well, you said how crappy it was going to be in the beginning. So.
Well, you can listen to an hour of junk if you want. That's totally up to you. You can waste your morning with us. Hopefully this as you're walking around listening to the podcast or trying to go to sleep here, there's a couple chuckles coming out where people are looking at you going, why are these people just laughing randomly with their headphones on? Hopefully there's some good moments here that you were able to relate to. Anyways, thank you all very much for watching the podcast and right now with us live. Our only ask for those of you who are avid listeners, please, if you like this content, if you found this was interesting, please let us know about sharing this with somebody else. Just let someone else know your work, or tweet it out, or share it on LinkedIn. We really appreciate the positive feedback. That really helps us promote the podcast and helps it get into more ears of other people, and so we can rot them out as well. Tommy, where else can you hear the podcast?
So you can find the podcast anywhere. They are available on Apple and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe, leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. If you are listening, join the conversation live every Tuesday and Thursday after we find out what the heck's going on with Build. We'll see our reactions there. Get it real time at 7:30 in the morning, Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Awesome. And I'm trying to also quickly transition here to the YouTube channel. So for those of you who've asked, there is a session this afternoon for this for calculation groups. I'm gonna see if I can go snag the link. Tommy, do you mind grabbing?
Tommy already pasted it.
Oh, thank you, Tommy. You put the meet up there. There's also a YouTube direct link as well.
I'll
So
do that as well.
if you wouldn't mind, Tommy, see if you can snag that one and put that in the chat window as well. Everyone, thank you very much. We appreciate your time today, and we'll see you next week.